This is a really important session and is chaired by Lizzie Banks from Oska Bright, an organisation I'm sure you'll all know well, the Oska Bright Film Festival. And she's been joined by Andrew Miller from We Shall Not Be Removed and Eleana Re from Carousel. And a lot of this is around the launch in September of the 7 Principles for Inclusive Recovery, which was a lot of arts organisations and funding bodies came together to offer practical advice to arts and cultural organisations to support disabled artists, audiences, visitors, participants and employees right across the piece. I mean, we were mentioning in the session earlier on about what things are going to be like when it comes back up to steam again. And it's important that some of the gains that were made over the last 5 to 10 years about accessibility and about opening up venues to audiences aren't lost in the scrabbles for survival out the other side. So I'm not quite sure, but I think Lizzie should be out there if she wants to join us. There.
Hello.
Hello, Lizzie. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you.
Where are you coming from today?
I'm beaming in live from horrible Brighton, where it's very grey. Very grey.
I thought the sun always shone on the south coast.
No.
Okay. There's another myth punctured. Well, I'm going to leave you and enjoy your session. I look forward to listening to it.
Lovely. Thank you, Hugh. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for this afternoon session. My name is Lizzie Banks. My pronouns are she, her. I'm sitting in my living room in dark grey Brighton. I've got long brown hair, I'm wearing glasses, and I've got a red cardigan on and a black dress. Before we start, I just want to mention the access issues that have been with the platform. We know that there's no BSL and captioning in the breakout rooms, which prevents everybody from being able to participate. And it's something that the This Way Up team acknowledge and will work to address in the future. It's brilliant that more people than ever are part of the conference and that it's free. I mean, there are 3 times the amount of people participating, but there's always still work to do, as we know, and we'll talk about in this session. But at the end of this session, the breakout rooms will be happening on Zoom. So you should have received a link in an email about that, and I believe it'll be posted in the chat. So I'm the producer at Oska Bright Film Festival, with the world's biggest film festival, giving a platform to filmmakers with a learning disability, autism and Asperger's. We're biennial and we tour around the UK, working with other festivals and venues, and the festival is led by 10 learning disabled artists who put the festival together. And we'll be hearing from one of them later on in the session. So welcome, Alison and Andrew. Thank you so much for being here today. Would you mind introducing yourselves and telling us a little bit about yourselves?
Okay, I'll go first. I'm Alison Gardner. I work at Glasgow Film, which is Glasgow Film Theatre and Glasgow Film Festival. Today I am in the attic in a sunny Edinburgh. Too early for Christmas trees, Lizzie, who has her Christmas tree in her background, just saying. I'm a middle-aged Scottish woman with grey hair, and I am wearing a red top with a stripy top and glasses too. So welcome.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Lizzie and Alison and everybody else. I'm Andrew Miller. I'm the UK Government Disability Champion for Arts and Culture. I'm a National Council member of the Arts Council of England and one of the founder members of the UK Disability Arts Alliance, We Shall Not Be Removed. I'm a middle-aged white wheelchair user in a black watch tartan jumper, sitting in my office in front of a bright orange blind.
Amazing. Thank you both. So today we're going to be talking about welcoming audiences back to the cinema. And whilst I know that this is probably going to be quite low down on the list of priorities, it's going to be a really hard next few months. We want to look at the ways that we can bring people back and celebrate the the amazing work that people have done in the past. We don't want to forget about that work. We want to make cinemas more safe and welcoming spaces to people. And there's no such thing as fully accessible. The spectrum of disabilities is too great. So we'll try and touch on as much as possible, but it's a big subject and we only have 50 minutes, but we will try our best. And as we go through the session, I'd really like to invite the panelists and the audience to think of one easy practical step that people can take away today to start thinking again about welcoming back deaf and disabled audiences. So please shout in the chat and we'll talk about these towards the end of the session. And please feel free to say if you're doing great work in the chat as well, and we'll try and mention as many of those things as possible, because I think it's really great if we can share the work that we're all doing and learn from one another. Okay, cool. So first I'd like to go to Andrew. So Andrew, We Shall Not Be Removed, you've put together these 7 inclusive principles for an inclusive recovery, which offer practical steps for organisations to support disabled audiences, artists, visitors, participants, and employees. So would you like to tell us a little bit more about them and how it all came about?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Lizzie. Now, I'm hoping that my presentation slides are going to appear. Yay! There they are. Thank you very much for that, our friends in tech. So I'm here to tell you about the 7 inclusive principles for arts and cultural organisations that were launched in September. But first, I'm going to give you a little bit of information about my background, which will help you contextualise my work in this area. So I started out over 30 years ago in broadcasting. I belonged to the first generation of disabled presenters on British television. The late 1980s were the first real moment of equality when broadcasters woke up to the lack of on-screen representation. And I found myself presenting the children's programme Boom on Channel 4 and a range of work for the BBC and ITV. But my presenting career ground to a halt after I attended an audition at the BBC, where I was told the Blue Peter audience are not yet ready for a disabled presenter. So for me, that moment of equality quickly passed. Oops, gone too far. There we are. Luckily, I had also trained in production and went on to become a BAFTA-nominated filmmaker, producing and directing arts and music documentaries on artists like Anthony Gormley, Bill Viola, Jerry Rafferty, and Billy Mackenzie. But it was a lonely place to be, as there were virtually no other disabled people in the industry. And there were certainly no mechanisms to support disabled people either. Consequently, when the commissions dried up, I had to change career again, and I've spent the last 20 years operating in the art sector. I'm sharing this as much of my work now, being government champion, being a National Council member of the Arts Council and chair of the BFI Disability Advisory Group, is to ensure the next generation of disabled people do not experience the same restrictions and frustrations that have impacted on me and my career. But let's come right up to date. I'm going to tell you about the We Shall Not Be Removed campaign and to share my thinking about what an inclusive recovery is. We started our campaign in May to raise the profile of creative, deaf, disabled and neurodiverse people and to advocate for a more inclusive recovery in the creative industries. Our alliance now has nearly 700 members made up of creative disabled practitioners or organisations working inclusively from across all art forms, all impairment groups, and from across all 4 UK nations. And this represents the biggest disability arts movement in the UK since the 1980s. We needed to do this as the pandemic has magnified existing inequalities nowhere more acutely than in the devastated creative industries. Activism to highlight these inequalities has brought to the fore the voices of those with the most to lose as our industry unravels: creative freelancers, Black and Asian workers, and disabled artists and audiences. Disabled people have felt badly overlooked throughout the pandemic, despite accounting for 2/3 of all coronavirus deaths in the UK. Even with a vaccine on the horizon, the risks to disabled people are still very real, but it is important to be aware that not all disabled people are susceptible to the virus. Our focus is now shifting from raising profile to advocating for a more inclusive cultural recovery. We need to do this because the sector that closed down in March is not coming back anytime soon. And even if it did, it didn't work for many creative disabled people due to the industry's endemic ableism. Outside of the disability community, ableism is still a largely unfamiliar term, but assuredly as racism, sexism, and homophobia, ableism wrecks opportunities for disabled people. Put simply, ableism is the behavior which unintentionally excludes or actively discriminates against disabled people. It applies to a wide range of situations, from limited physical access to a limited understanding of the support deaf, neurodiverse, and disabled people need to succeed. Ableism also acts as a conditioning agent, setting fake boundaries that limit disabled people's expectations. The pandemic has made matters worse. New rules now apply, and so too do new barriers. For example, sector-leading bodies and individual cultural organisations spent the summer interpreting government reopening guidance, giving rise to unintended discriminatory practice being applied to disabled people, which is why we created the 7 Inclusive Principles. The principles have been developed by a partnership of campaigning cultural organisations comprising us, We Shall Not Be Removed, Ramps on the Moon. The principles are specifically aimed at the non-disabled arts and entertainment sectors to support disability inclusion through these difficult times. The focus is to ensure disabled people are not discriminated against as creative work begins again and as venues reopen. The 7 principles offer practical guidance to support disabled artists, audiences, visitors, participants, and employees. The principles highlight the importance of meeting the legal obligations of the Equality Act. All organisational activities must comply with the requirement of the Equality Act and make reasonable adjustments to operating practice that ensure disabled people are not unlawfully discriminated against. This is a simple and non-negotiable principle which should guide everything you do in this arena. The second principle is to go beyond reasonable adjustment. You have a role combating ableism in the sector by encouraging the use of the social model of disability. The social model recognises that it is society's barriers, not an individual's impairment, that causes discrimination and excludes disabled people. You therefore have a duty to understand what ableism is, to identify and eliminate it from your working methods. Adopting an anti-ableist approach will have a significant impact on all your interactions with disabled artists, audiences, and employees. It's vital organisations consult directly with disabled people when creating COVID-secure measures that directly impact disabled people. This is about co-production, authenticity, and the rallying cry of the disability arts movement, nothing about us without us. It still holds true, as disabled people are the leading experts on disability, but even now our voices are often ignored. Organisations need to provide clear, accurate, and comprehensive information about their COVID measures, made available in a variety of accessible formats to enable disabled audiences and participants assess their own levels of risk. It's also important organisations are prepared to flexibly adapt to specific inquiries or requests from disabled individuals. The fifth principle is remapping the customer journey for disabled audiences, ensuring it is equality impact assessed, does not pose any onerous or unreasonable requirements of disabled audiences. For example, queuing, accessible seating, hygienic facilities, and free companion tickets. All of these should be regarded as essential in maintaining good access. The sixth principle is specifically aimed for producing organizations to encourage the engagement of disabled artists in the creation of all new work. The UK is a global leader in inclusive arts, and we must ensure that is maintained and protected through this pandemic and beyond. Oh. And finally, celebrating disability in the workforce, particularly when difficult decisions around redundancy are being made. This has never been more important, as the signals are that diverse employees are at the highest risk of redundancy. Organizations should ensure they celebrate diversity, embed anti-ableist principles to support and protect their disabled workforce. This will serve you well, as audiences and funders' expectations around diversity of the organizations they support is only going to increase, not diminish, through this decade. The 7 principles are applicable across all art forms and across all 4 UK nations, and come with the endorsement from a wide range of leading organisations, including the UK Arts Councils, the British Council, British Film Institute, Inclusive Cinema, Museums Association, UK Theatre, and many more. The 7 principles document can be found on the We Shall Not Be Removed website in all accessible formats. It contains links to a wide range of free resources to support people at every level in the infrastructure, really get to grips with best practice. And it's important that everyone from management to programmers, front of house and box office understand their implications. Oh, I keep on going too fast. Alongside the work of We Shall Not Be Removed and the 7 principles, it's also worth checking out the new BFI campaign, Press Reset, which offers the film industry useful guidance and resources to support disabled people in film. This illustrates a new direction of travel for the BFI, but also a determination to ensure better representation across the industry. And the Audience Access Alliance has also formed to support the wider live events industry with Building Back for All, demanding an inclusive recovery for disabled audiences. This coalition is made up of a number of leading audience-focused organisations from across industry sectors. So whilst we're facing in the immediate term a grim outlook at the moment, let's commit to creating a more inclusive industry on the other side of this catastrophe. Because on the other side, we will all have been through too much to allow the old discriminatory barriers re-emerge to prevent inclusion. And I hope that the 7 principles assist you in that task. Back to you, Lizzie.
Amazing. Thank you, Andrew. I think it's a really brilliant document that helps cement lots of stuff that disabled people and organisations have been talking about and doing for years. So it's nice to see it's out there in a new physical form that people can see. How will you be working with venues and checking in with them to make sure that they're getting the most out of it and that this work starts to happen?
Well, We Shall Not Be Removed as a campaign, Lizzie. It doesn't have resources to police this work. We've produced this work, it's disabled led, but it really is now up to the industry itself to take the lessons and start embedding the practice. We would really love to hear about how the principles are being embedded, what the challenges that organizations experience in embedding them. We would love to hear about that, but we don't have any resource to be able to support the industry any further. However, we are a network of disabled professionals in this industry. And so, you know, if the industry wishes to consult with us, then that's what it should do.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a big thing, isn't it? Just to ask. people with the expertise to come in and offer advice and to support this development. That's really, really essential, I think. Yeah. Alison, a lot of those steps, I think, are really visible in the work that you do at Glasgow Film. Can you tell us how you've been working to engage disabled and deaf audiences?
That was really great, Andrew. Thank you so much. I really enjoyed that, and also very impressed with the 80s clothes from your presenting days. Yes, it's great. The abiding principle that Andrew mentioned, nothing for us without us, is the one phrase that's very easy for us to use in our workplace, and it just makes sure everybody thinks much more carefully about every project that we do. Again, I would agree with Andrew and yourself, Lizzie, venues are not all fully accessible. There's a huge range of people that we need to look out for and cater for and make adaptations for. But I would say that Glasgow Film is open and willing to learn and willing to admit its mistakes. I think that's something that I think is really important that Andrew and I mentioned earlier on when we were chatting. It's really important that people don't feel the 7 principles are prescriptive or putting you on the naughty step. They're there to guide you, encourage you, to make you think about things. They're not there to, give you a slap on the hand. It's really important that you look at it openly, I think, is the best advice I would give. We are very lucky. We've got Jodie Wilkinson, who a lot of you people will know out there, all the delegates. She is a fantastic public engagement coordinator, and she leads our team on the acts and research projects that we do around Visible Cinema, which is our monthly club for deaf and deafened audiences. And these were huge learning curves because we talked to people, we put things in place, we thought this was great, and then when you actually have it, then it's all change again, because you have to learn that things need adapting again or changing again, or this is not right and that's not right. And I think that adaptability is really important. Mm-hmm. So Visible Cinema essentially is a film every month that is captioned, and then the post-film discussion is BSL interpreted. And also we use staged text, because obviously not all deaf people use BSL. So there was another whole layer of learning around that. And our wish is that people feel comfortable, come to Visible Cinema, access Film Club, they really enjoy it, but then they feel able to come to all the events that we have at GM, to migrate into those events. And that seems to be happening, which is heartening.
Yeah, absolutely. That's amazing that they feel so comfortable that they can go to anything. I mean, that's the real success, isn't it? That we don't have to have separate events. If the world Absolutely. Was a better place, then Oska Bright wouldn't exist. It's just that, isn't it? That's incredible.
We are still learning. I mean, that's something I have to put out there. There's no such thing as the perfect organisation. We're still learning. We're learning from our mistakes. We're learning from people. We're listening to their criticisms. Just, I think that whole thing about being open and taking it on board and really looking at it. So one example was a lot of the people from the Access Film Club for people with autism. They really enjoyed the cinema where they were in, but they didn't want to push past other people if they were distressed. Yeah. So we have glow sticks now so that people can hold them up, and then they can be shown out to a safe space if they want. And it was one simple thing that just really changed the dynamic and made it work. So I think that constant learning is really important, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. So at GFT, you were the first cinema in Scotland to run autism-friendly screenings.
I think we were the first cinema to be recognised by the National Autistic Society of Scotland as autism-friendly. I think that was a real big coup for us, because it was just nice to be recognised for all the work that had been done, especially by Jodie. She takes all the credit. But I would agree with Andrew. It has to involve everybody. Program team, CEO, senior management, front of house. Everybody has to be embedded in this. It's not a top-down thing. It has to be embedded across all the teams. Otherwise, it just doesn't work.
Yeah, absolutely. And how did Access Film Club come about after the autism-friendly screenings? Because as we know, autism-friendly screenings are amazing and are great for young autistic people and their families. They start off a love of film, but the reality is that you are autistic all your life, and you might not want to watch Smurfs 3D or whatever. You want to watch something else, something that's more appropriate for your age. So how did that come about?
So we're always looking for journeys. How do we get people through the journey of Glasgow Film Theatre and the vast array of work we do? And that involves from, liking cult classics through to the more art house things. It's through everything. So we did free screenings for families with autism on a Saturday. But then we thought, what happens to these people when they're like 14, 15, nobody that age, autism or not, wants to hang out with their parents, So we thought, maybe they want to do something that's more about what they want to do and how they want to lead their own life, get on the bus, come to the cinema, etc. So we started that. We made a huge mistake at the beginning, because when we consulted with these young adults, they were like, oh, we'd like to program it. And we're like, yeah, that's great. No. They only chose the films they liked, and they weren't really considering all the other people that were in the audience, what they would like. And also they chose things, weirdly enough, Home Alone came up a lot. They wanted to see. They chose things that they really loved and had watched many, many times. But for us, we felt that was not really the ethos of GFT, because we're about discovery of new films. So we changed the dynamic a little bit and started putting in brand new releases for them, but then having a host who was autistic himself start the chat around it, so that there was something to contextualize it for them, because we wanted them to be involved in the GFT-ness of the program, not just have like a home cinema screen for them. That wasn't really working for us, because if we want these young people to have the journey from the Access Film Club into the wider program, then they have to understand the wider program.
Absolutely. And when we had a little chat before, you said that people that don't have autism come to those screenings as well, which I think is amazing.
Because we have a flat pricing rate for that, so that nobody feels discriminated against. So it's £6.50 for everybody. So, maybe the odd person thinks, oh, I'll just go to this cheap show instead of the 8 o'clock screening, for example. And but then at that point, then they're mixing with a different audience. They're listening to the chat. They're listening to the young people talk about their experiences based on what they've seen on the screen. So really, it's a wider learning curve for the general audience. You get a cheap ticket, but you got to sit there and listen.
Before I forget, yesterday the session with the young programmers was really, really brilliant. If anybody missed that, I would catch up, because some of the stuff they were talking about there, I think, is applicable to disabled audiences as well. They were talking about sliding scale forms for tickets, things like having charging points in your foyer, so people will come in and sit down and hang out and talk, making the Wi-Fi more available, things like that just bring people in and create a welcoming space.
Gosh, Kat, I hope that we can get back to those days pretty soon.
Fingers crossed.
Go and just bring people in and not have them segregated at 2 meter distances coming in. But
Yeah.
I liked Andrew's point. I think that's really important. We did a survey of all those audiences we talked about, people, our dementia screenings, our Access Film Club, our Visible Cinema. We talked to them directly and said, what would make you safe about coming back to GFT? What can we do to make it you, this particular audience, feel safe to come back? Or would you prefer it if we took it online for a while, for example? Is there what issues would affect you coming back? And essentially, the same as all audiences, they want to be back because they like the social atmosphere.
Absolutely.
People or disability are sick of things on Zoom or, screen.
It's worth bearing in mind, though, that there was some research undertaken in the summer by Indigo Consulting, and it's a survey called After the Interval Act 2, which revealed the most extraordinary loss of confidence in disabled audiences to returning to live event attendance, which obviously include cinema, anything that involves a mass gathering. And actually, a lot of work is going to have to be put in by cinemas and all public ticketed organizations to really get disabled audiences back to the level they were. In England, disabled audiences in the arts reached about 12% of all audiences. So it's a very significant audience. And there has been evidence of a significant loss of confidence in that audience, something in the region of 25% saying they will not return until after the vaccine's been delivered, and then around 40% saying yes, on the basis what you were just describing, Alison, of ensuring that certain hygienic and audience management issues are being obeyed.
Yeah, we were quite lucky at Glasgow Film Theatre when we were the small period we were allowed to open between 31st of August and 2nd of November, when we then went into Tier 3 in Glasgow, that we had a very high compliance of audiences wearing masks, very, very, very high. People were commending us on our fantastic safety measures, and we did have return of some people with disabilities, but I would agree with Andrew, not nearly even close to the level that we had before.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think a lot of work is required there.
Yeah, I've got some slides which we'll come on to in a bit, but it seems to be the same thing from our audiences as well, that there's a lot of reluctance and fear about coming back. Yeah.
You can understand that, especially based on the statistic Andrew shared with us, in terms of people getting COVID, and dying. Then if that's a high percentage of people with disabilities, then you can understand exactly why the fear is there, and how do we remove that fear?
And it's also a very fundamental issue about confidence. Disabled people have spent the last 40 years emerging out of the medical model of disability into the social model and being accepted across society. And overnight in March, we were all plunged back into a medical model of disability. We were all suddenly extremely vulnerable. With underlying health conditions. So that fundamentally is the medical model. So it's going to take some work to rebuild people's confidence, not just in terms of COVID, but in terms of, re-engaging with wider society. That won't happen overnight.
Yeah, absolutely. I wonder if now is a good time to go to the video of Eleana. Eleana's an autistic artist that we work with at Carousel. She is brilliant, and I thought I'd ask her how she was feeling about going back to the cinema. So yeah, if we could see that video, that would be amazing. Thank you. I'm joined by Eleana Re. Eleana, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Eleana Button, and I'm part of Carousel Arts.
Cool, thanks, Eleana. So with the 7 inclusive steps, which ones stand out to you? Which do you think are really important?
Well, I would say the ones that stand out to me the most are two of them in particular. One was speaking about like the fact that disabled people are artists themselves, and actually society almost sort of expects them to just go and look at art on days out as an extra, as a bonus, not as something that's necessarily normal for them to do. But disabled people, there are many people I know, and there are many people and organisations for disabled people to do art, and they do art, and they do great art as well at that. So
like you,
like me, yes.
Yeah.
Myself, I would say so too. Great.
Definitely.
I've got autism. I've got atypical autism. So yeah, that's how I fit into Carousel, and I do my art with them.
Yeah,
all sorts, from filmmaking to creative writing to visual art, and even like performing, and I think on the way might be some artistic directing of all sorts, not just films, anything.
Brilliant. Yeah, that's fantastic.
Yeah, and the other one that resonated with me was the one that said about disabled people having barriers up because of society. They're not actually disabled, they are able, but it's just society that's making things not as accessible for them. And I don't think that's fair, and I think society should be all including, all inclusive, and then we can get the best out of people with all sorts of conditions. So yeah.
Brilliant.
And make it a much more inclusive and accepting society, which will be better for everyone.
Absolutely.
I think.
Yeah. Wouldn't it be great if the future looked like that? That would be amazing.
Yeah, that would be awesome.
Yeah. So how are you feeling about going back to the cinema when they reopen?
Back to the cinema when they reopen. I am sort of looking forward to it, but sort of a bit like standing back, like apprehensive, like sort of like a bit put off, because I don't know if it will be as fun as it used to be, because you've got to make sure that, like, when you're getting the popcorn, you're standing in a queue very distanced, and you make sure that you're sitting distance from people in the cinema, and so I'm not sure I will bother going to the cinema unless there's a really good film that catches my eye. But yeah, I don't know, because the thing is, like, I used to just go to the cinema like more when I felt like going to the cinema, and I'll just watch, or if there's something that sort of vaguely looks interesting, then I'll go and watch it, but with someone else, like a friend or family or someone. But like now, I think it would have to be a really good film for me to want to make an effort to watch it. I think it's more about the film now than the experience. So yeah.
So you were like talking about how like when you went to the cinema, it was really, the rules were really complicated, and you didn't understand what you could and couldn't do. So what could cinemas do to make that clearer for you, so you felt that you could go there?
I think, like, one thing you could do is have a QR code like you do easily on the NHS app, so you can people can just put their phone on the QR code, and then they can read it on their phone. Obviously there's a worry about, because everyone's got a phone these days, it seems like, at least, and there's a worry of like picking up leaflets because of hands and germs and stuff. So I think that would be the best, if you can read it on and there will be an easy read one to select, or and there would be an easy way of getting that easy read version. So yeah, of the rules, a copy of the rules. Yeah,
that's a great idea. That's such a good idea. So we make walkthrough videos to support cinemas, make themselves more accessible and welcoming. What do you think about walkthrough videos, and would you like to see more things like that? Do you think they're helpful?
I think they are quite good to help people, especially if people who are disabled are going on their own and they don't know what the deal is with all the toilets and the snacks and where to go and stuff like that. So I think they are useful. I think that maybe they should just be more publicised, more on the actual. They should be on more cinema websites and stuff like that, because I think a lot of people do book tickets online, so they can look at it. They might come across it while they're there and be like, "Oh, that's useful." So, yeah.
And do you think it would be helpful? I mean, we thought they were helpful even before COVID. So now, what do you think about that? Like trying to know what the rules are and if there are different entrances and exits. Do you think it's useful to see it visually before you go?
Yeah, it is useful. Yeah, definitely useful. It's just hard to know where you can put them, where you can actually get people to view them, because a lot of people I think might not be aware that they exist. But if they do, then yeah, it will be useful, and they can watch it beforehand, and that will be useful, I think, definitely.
Yeah, but that's a good point though, that cinemas, as well as just putting them on their website and burying them somewhere in there, they should be vocal about the fact that they've made them and that they're trying. That's a really good point. What could cinemas do to be more welcoming to autistic and learning disabled audiences?
I think just to have loads of visual stuff. I think posters and things to make it look warm and cozy and friendly. And I think it would be very good if they had cozy cafes in a lot of them, because cafes are a really cozy atmosphere, and having one there and people can go to it even when they're not going to the cinema might increase an interest in the cinema, as just a side effect of it type thing, if that's what you call it. But it's just I think they need to make cinemas a sort of friendly place to come, and maybe even have clubs there or stuff like that, like film clubs and activities going on in the cinema, not just watching the films, and having easy read stuff, a lot more out there, easy read leaflets. And if they're not doing leaflets because of COVID, then maybe on the phone that you can look on through a QR code, or on the website. So yeah, I think that's it really. Just make it really accessible, and just sort of a friendly posters and slogans and people and visuals and stuff. Make it obvious that it's welcoming type thing. Accessible and neurodiverse. That's what we want.
That's what we want. Yeah. Thank you, Eleanor, for joining us and sharing your opinions and giving us all this brilliant feedback about what you think cinemas should do next.
It was my pleasure. You're quite welcome. Thank you too. I enjoy giving my opinions, so that's great. Thanks.
Thank you. There we go, the delightful Eleanor. Yeah, I think a lot of the things that she mentioned are really important and stuff that might seem obvious, but needs to be thought about as we open back up again. Just trying to create a warm and friendly space that is inviting. And I like all her ideas about QR codes with any information. I think that's great. So I've got some slides which reflect a lot of things that Eleanor said. So I'm just going to run through those quickly. So if we could get those up. Thank you. So we have been surveying our audiences, and these are just the initial results. It's something that we want to keep on doing over the next few months to see how people are feeling. But this is what we have for now. So the split between independent and chain cinemas, I thought was really interesting and good to see that people are going to independent cinemas. And anecdotally over the years, I think a lot of people have said that they feel safer and there's more of a community vibe and spirit in independent cinemas, which I think is great and something that we should all make the most of. A lot of people are going to the cinema with their friends and independently, which I think is brilliant. So I think in terms of marketing, that needs some thinking about how do we reach learning disabled and autistic audiences? How do we talk to them? And the majority of people have not been to the cinema in that little non-lockdowny bit, whatever it was, which I think is to be expected, really. And then how did you feel when you're at the cinema? I think that's quite reassuring. 60% of audiences felt okay and comfortable while they were there. And 30% okay, but a bit worried. And 10% didn't feel comfortable at all. So I think that's good. And we know that what everybody's been doing so far is okay, and that I think once people are in there, perhaps they feel a little bit more at ease. I think there's a lot of worry about going back in initially. And I felt that way too. When I went back only once, I was nervous at first, but it was actually fine. So I think that's good to talk about. And what worries you most about returning to the cinema? The top answer was social distancing. How and where you can book tickets. This is always a big thing that we find. I think personal interaction is really, really key for learning disabled and autistic audiences to talk with someone, to have that face-to-face interaction. Self-service machines are great, but there's nothing like a real person. And I know there are risks involved with that at the moment, and that's a consideration, but I think it's really important for people to know the people in their cinema. And then the third reason, the third worry, there not being enough staff around to help. I think that links in as well. If something goes wrong, if you have a question, people want to see somebody there that they can talk to.
Presumably also, Lizzie, they want somebody there in case other audience members are not behaving themselves.
Yes, that was something we saw actually in the results. People had noticed people took their masks off when they weren't eating or that kind of thing, and they didn't know what to do or who to talk to. Yeah, absolutely. 70% of audiences said they would love to see walkthrough videos. So that's great. And like Eleanor was saying, they're amazing, but perhaps everybody should shout about them a little bit more. You know, maybe they're buried in people's websites. Maybe we could think about posting them on social media or putting them in the next newsletter or something that's a bit more visible for audiences. And what would help you return? So staff getting training about welcoming disabled audiences, videos of the venue, knowing who you can talk to if there's a problem, seating plans being clear, how will it be distanced, lots of signage, clear information about the maximum capacity, fantastic films. If they say they accept the CEA card, again, I think people could advertise that a little bit more widely, just so it's really obvious that you do and that your doors are open. And then I love this one. The cinema has a good relationship with trade unions and looks after their staff. I thought that was great.
That is a really good point, actually.
Yeah.
We have paid our staff 100% of their salaries through the whole thing, and I think it's something that we should talk to everybody about. We also paid our front of house staff a percentage of overtime based on what they'd earned last year so that they weren't losing out, and I think that's the right thing to do.
Absolutely. I think that's amazing, and I think people really value that, and they want to know that where they're going, those people are looked after and respected and cared for. I thought that was lovely.
That means presumably they'll then look after the audience members.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I thought that was a really lovely answer. Will you go to the cinema once lockdown is over? 59% maybe. And I think this is the key thing here. We've got a group of people that don't know how they feel yet, but we have the time to think about how we reach out to them, how we talk to them, and how we re-engage them. And I think there's just a lot of fear, but I think there's a lot of work we can do to ease that fear and to welcome people back. And then just to hammer home the non-Smurfs 3D kind of thing, these are the films that people said they'd like to see. So Labyrinth, Dark City, Time Machine, Nightmare Before Christmas, Poltergeist, 2001, The Shining, Princess Bride, Billy Elliot, which I thought was a good selection. Yeah. So those are the initial results of our survey. So there have been a couple of questions from the audience. One from Jonathan: I wonder how the panel see the format of relaxed screenings working in tandem with the COVID secure guidelines.
That's a really difficult one, actually, relaxed screenings, because obviously people are free to move around to go where they're most comfortable. And at the moment, because we have allocated seats that we clean after each screening, it's a much more difficult thing. I think there's probably ways around it. I'm just not sure I've thought of it yet, or we've come together as a team to really knuckle that down. I think it's a difficult thing because you don't want to then, by the very nature of having a relaxed screening, say, well, you must sit in that seat. Because if people move around, then other people get distressed because they're moving away from their seat that's 2 meters away from them. 2 meters in Scotland, that is not in England, but 2 meters in Scotland still. So then there's a whole other issue around how you keep all those audience members safe. So it's a difficult one. Great question.
Yeah, absolutely. And then one for you, Alison. Does Glasgow Film have any deaf or disabled people as part of your permanent staff? And if not, will you be looking to hire any consultants in the future?
We do have somebody in our staff, and also we've just put out for new board members as well, and asking if people from the deaf community, if they want to apply to be on the board. Brilliant.
So a great time to get involved.
That just went out today.
Yeah.
People under 30, and in fact, I've had a couple of people ask me already for an informal chat, so that's really good. But yes, like I said, we need to do better as well. We're not the perfect organisation, but keeping on learning, I think, is the best option that we have.
Yeah, absolutely. So we must wrap up, but is there anything a one step that, or one little bit of advice that you would offer to venues to help them start thinking about welcoming back deaf and disabled audiences?
Yes, I would say the one thing you really have to do is start understanding your own ableism. The lesson of Black Lives Matter this summer was to make us completely reevaluate our view on racism, and realize how we barely even scratched the surface. We have to do the lessons of disabled people through this terrible pandemic are the same. We must understand ableism better. We must understand how it affects people at every level. It's also a conditioning factor. It really damages people's view of themselves. I'll give you a very brief example. For 6 years of my life at private school in Glasgow, the High School of Glasgow, there was no disabled toilet. I couldn't use the loo for 6 years. And so I had to make the adjustment. And I think disabled people have now got to a point where, I mean, an example of that couldn't happen now, it would be illegal. But disabled people are now sick and tired of having to make the adjustments themselves. It's now up to organizations and funded bodies to do that and to really get their thinking in gear. The 7 Principles offers useful and practical guidance to support organizations, but there's something you need to go a little bit further. You really need to understand how you challenge your own ableism, and make sure that you can find ways of rooting that out of your processes and your practice.
Absolutely. Thank you, Andrew. Alison?
I would agree with Andrew. I think that is a tough challenge. I would say it's tough, and I'd say it's doable. I always say there's no problems unsolvable in my universe. Give me enough time to think it through. I used to say that to my children. But I also think a sort of slow, steady approach is really good, in the sense that you embed things that I don't like projects. You know, that we just do something and then we work with you group of people and they say, we're bored of you now, let's move on to something else. I don't like projects. I like it to be a slow, steady embedding through the organisation. And I think you have to just put one foot in front of the other and talk to people. Nothing for us without us. That's really, the way that you learn.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's the perfect sentiment to end on, I think. Thank you both so much. This has been a really great discussion, and I don't know if anybody has any questions, please find us and ask us. I think we'd all be happy to talk and offer advice. The meeting room on Zoom, we can carry on the conversation from 3:15 till 4, and the meeting room button will be in the foyer of all this this amazing thing, which will redirect people to Zoom. So I'll be there, and I think Alison is coming. Andrew, I don't know. Pat, no, okay. But
he's a busy man.
Alison and myself will be there. But thank you both so much for your time, and enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thank you. Lovely to meet you, Andrew. Lovely to see you again, Lizzie.
Lovely to see you both. Thank you so much.